This story contains themes that some listeners may find disturbing or intense. Listener discretion is advised. Imagine a town like Oakhaven, nestled deep in the heartland, where the biggest news usually involved the high school football team or a new diner opening on Main Street. A place where folks left their doors unlocked, where children played until twilight, and where the only ghosts were in old folktales. Until the night of October 27th. That was the night the impossible began, the night a chill settled over everything, a chill that had nothing to do with the crisp autumn air. It was the night Sarah Jenkins vanished. Sarah was exactly what you'd picture as a typical Oakhaven resident. 29 years old, a kindergarten teacher, lived in a neat little bungalow on Elm Street with her golden retriever Buster. She baked cookies for her neighbors, volunteered at the local animal shelter, and had a laugh that could brighten even the dreariest day. She was, in every sense, a presence. And then she wasn't. Her friend Emily Chun was the first to realize something was wrong. They had a standing Tuesday night movie date. Emily arrived at Sarah's door a little before 7, a tub of popcorn in one hand, a new release DVD in the other. She knocked. No answer. She called Sarah's cell. Straight to voicemail. A flicker of annoyance, then concern. Sarah was never late, never forgot. Emily tried the doorknob. Unlocked. Just like everyone in Oakhaven. She stepped inside. "Sarah? You here?" The house was quiet. Too quiet. Buster usually greeted visitors with a flurry of tail wags and happy yips, but tonight silence. Emily's heart began to thud a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She called out again, louder this time. Nothing. The living room was tidy. A half-finished crossword puzzle lay on the coffee table beside a mug with a faint tea stain. The TV was off. The kitchen was clean. Sarah's car was in the driveway. Her purse with her wallet and keys was on the counter. Her phone, still ringing in Emily's hand, was not. Emily found Buster curled up on Sarah's bed, whimpering softly. He looked up at Emily with wide, fearful eyes, a look she'd never seen from the usually boisterous dog. It wasn't the look of a dog who'd been left alone. It was the look of a dog who had witnessed something profoundly unsettling. That's when Emily called 911. Detective David Miller was tired. He just finished a double shift, the usual Oakhaven fare. A fender bender, a couple of teenagers caught spray painting the water tower, a domestic dispute that ended with a stern warning. He was looking forward to a quiet night, maybe a beer and some old baseball on TV. Then the call came in. A missing person. Adults don't just disappear, not in Oakhaven. Not without a trace. He arrived at Sarah Jenkins' bungalow a little after 8. The house was already cordoned off with yellow tape. A flashing patrol car casting an eerie glow on the manicured lawn. Emily Chun, pale and trembling, was giving a statement to Officer Peterson. David took a deep breath, the crisp autumn air doing little to dispel the growing sense of dread in his gut. He walked through the house, his gaze sweeping over every detail. No forced entry, no signs of a struggle, nothing out of place really. It was as if Sarah had simply dissolved. Her bed was neatly made. Her clothes were in the closet. Her toothbrush was in the holder. Everything was exactly where it should be, except Sarah. And her phone. David checked the windows. Latched. The back door. Secure. The alarm system, if she had one, wasn't engaged, but then again, nobody in Oakhaven really bothered with alarms. The town was safe. It was safe. He knelt by the coffee table, examining the crossword puzzle. Sarah had filled in a few answers. Autumn. Maple. Quiet. Harmless everyday words. He picked up the mug. Cold. He ran his finger along the rim of the table. No dust. Nothing. The house was meticulously clean, almost sterile. Too clean. It felt less like a home and more like a display. Anything? He asked Officer Peterson, who was running a flashlight beam over the pristine kitchen counter. Peterson shook his head. Nothing, Detective. No prints we can lift beyond hers and her friends. No signs of a struggle. Looks like she just walked out, but her purse and keys are right here. He gestured to the counter. And her car's in the driveway. David went back to the living room, his eyes narrowing. He noticed Buster, still on the bed, now watching him with that same unnerving intensity. The dog wasn't barking, wasn't growling, just watching, a silent, furry sentinel of a vacant space. What about Buster? David asked. Any signs he was agitated? Did he bark at anything? Emily, still shaken, chimed in. No, that's the weirdest part. He's usually so vocal. I didn't hear a peep when I got here. He was just on her bed, quiet. That struck David. A golden retriever, usually a loud and protective breed, silent during a disappearance? It was wrong. It didn't fit. He knelt down and offered Buster his hand. The dog sniffed it cautiously, then licked it once, a cold, wet touch. But there was no tail wag, no playful nudge. Just an underlying tremor in the dog's body. As the night wore on, the initial search turned up nothing. No witnesses. No discarded items. The neighbors hadn't seen or heard anything unusual. One, an elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, swore she'd seen Sarah watering her plants around 6 that evening. A perfectly normal activity. After that, nothing. The street lights had hummed their usual tune. The crickets had chirped. The world had gone on as normal, oblivious to the void that had opened in Sarah Jenkins' life. David spent hours going over the house again and again meticulously. He used a UV light looking for blood, fluids, anything. Nothing. He dusted for prints, finding only Sarah's and Emily's. He checked every nook and cranny, every closet, every cabinet. It was a perfectly ordinary house, now infused with an extraordinary absence. As the first slivers of dawn began to paint the Oakhaven sky in cool, muted tones, David stood in Sarah's living room, feeling utterly baffled. The air was still and cold, not from the outside chill, but from an invisible internal frost. He felt a profound sense of emptiness, a draining of color from the vibrant life Sarah once inhabited. It was a strange, unsettling feeling, as if the light itself had been dimmed, leaving behind only shades of gray. This wasn't just a missing person. This was something else. Someone or something had taken Sarah Jenkins without leaving a single trace. No struggle, no forced entry, no witnesses, no evidence. Just an empty space and a silent, terrified dog. The case of Sarah Jenkins wasn't just unsolved, it was unexplainable. And as the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the unsettling truth began to dawn on David Miller and the entire community of Oakhaven. Sarah Jenkins wasn't the first. She was just the beginning. And the entity responsible for these impossible vanishings would soon earn a chilling moniker, whispered in hushed tones, a name that perfectly captured its elusive, devastating nature: the Gray Ghost. The name, the Gray Ghost, didn't materialize overnight, nor was it coined by some sensationalist tabloid. It was born from the chilling, repetitive reality of what followed Jessica Robin's disappearance. The initial confusion, the frantic searches, the heartbroken family. That was a familiar, if tragic, story. But then it happened again. 6 months after Jessica vanished from her locked apartment, a successful young architect named David Chun disappeared from his meticulously secured brownstone in a different part of the city. David was known for his almost obsessive attention to detail, a trait that extended to his personal security. His home, a beautifully restored historic building, was equipped with state-of-the-art alarms, reinforced locks, and a private security service that patrolled the street. He lived alone, worked long hours, and his routine was as predictable as the sunrise. On a Tuesday evening after a late meeting, David returned home, waved to the security guard, and entered his building. His last known communication was a text to his sister, Karen, confirming dinner plans for the following night. The next morning, when Karen couldn't reach him, she grew concerned. David never missed a call, especially from family. By noon, after repeated unanswered calls and a growing sense of dread, she contacted his office. They confirmed he hadn't shown up for work, which was unprecedented. Karen, armed with a spare key, went to his brownstone. What she found, or rather didn't find, was eerily familiar. The front door was locked from the inside. The alarm system was armed and fully functional, showing no signs of tampering. Every window was latched, every screen intact. There was no forced entry, no sign of a struggle, no broken glass, no overturned furniture, no struggle marks. David's wallet, keys, and phone were on his bedside table. His car was still in the garage. His bed was neatly made, as if he'd simply gotten up and walked out, except he hadn't. He had vanished. Detective Mark Peterson, a veteran of the city's police force with 25 years on the job, was assigned to David Chen's case. Peterson was a man forged by decades of urban grit, his face etched with the weariness of countless investigations. He'd seen it all. Brutal murders, intricate heists, heartbreaking child abductions. But David Chin's disappearance, much like Jessica Robin's, defied every logical explanation he had ever encountered. "It's like he just evaporated," Peterson muttered to his partner, Detective Sarah Miller, as they stood in David's pristine bedroom, the silence amplifying the chilling absence. Miller, sharp and analytical, was usually quick to spot discrepancies, but even she was stumped. "No, Mark, evaporated implies a natural process," Miller corrected, her brow furrowed. "This implies an unnatural one. Someone or something took him. But how? And why no trace?" The police conducted a thorough search of the brownstone, a grid-by-grid examination that lasted days. They brought in K9 units, forensics teams, and even an independent security consultant to scrutinize the alarm system. Not a single clue emerged. No fingerprints belonging to an unknown person. No DNA. No forced entry points, hidden passages, or secret rooms. The security cameras on the street showed David entering his home, but never leaving. The internal cameras, strategically placed by David himself, showed nothing out of the ordinary, just an empty hallway after he presumably went to bed. The similarities to Jessica Robin's case were too striking to ignore. Locked premises, no forced entry, no struggle, no motive, no trace. Initially, the department tried to downplay the connection, fearing public panic. They floated theories of voluntary disappearance, amnesia, or even a highly sophisticated professional kidnapping where the victim was somehow lured out. But each theory crumbled under scrutiny. David Chun had no enemies, no debts, no secret life. He was a creature of habit, deeply connected to his family and work. Then, 3 months later, it happened again. This time it was Emily Sanchez, a beloved high school teacher, known for her vibrant personality and dedication to her students. Emily lived in a charming older house in a quiet, tree-lined suburb, a good distance from both Jessica's apartment and David's brownstone. Her disappearance was equally baffling. Emily had hosted a small book club meeting at her home on a Thursday evening. Her friends, the last to leave, confirmed she locked the front door behind them around 10:30 p.m. Her car was in the driveway, her purse and keys on the kitchen counter. The next morning, when she didn't show up for school, and her principal couldn't reach her, concern quickly escalated. A welfare check was initiated. Once again, the scene was devoid of answers. The house was locked, windows secured. No signs of forced entry. No struggle. Her dog, a small terrier named Buster, was found whimpering by the back door, seemingly unharmed but distressed. Buster was usually a vocal watchdog, barking at every unfamiliar sound or visitor. Yet, according to neighbors, no unusual noises were heard that night. No barking, just silence. Detective Peterson and Miller were now officially assigned to all 3 cases, which the department reluctantly began to refer to as linked. The media, ever hungry for a narrative, started to pick up on the chilling pattern. Local news channels ran segments comparing the disappearances, highlighting the impossible circumstances surrounding each one. The term phantom abductor started to appear in headlines. 3 people, Mark, Miller said, pacing Peterson's cluttered office, a map of the city tacked to the wall, marked with the locations of the vanishings. Jessica, David, Emily, all gone without a trace. It's like they've been erased. No witnesses, no struggle, no anything. Peterson leaned back in his ancient swivel chair, the springs groaning in protest. He rubbed his temples, a headache brewing. "We've got nothing, Sarah. No one's asking for ransom. No bodies. No leads. Just an empty space where a person used to be." The public, initially sympathetic, was now starting to feel a creeping dread. Whispers began in coffee shops and grocery store aisles. People started double-checking their locks, installing new security systems, and looking over their shoulders. Parents walked their children to school, even if it was just a block away. A palpable fear, cold and insidious, began to weave itself into the fabric of daily life. It was a local journalist, a cynical but sharp reporter named Brenda Hayes, who first used the term that would stick. In a late-night broadcast, after a particularly frustrating update from the police department that offered no new information, she looked directly into the camera, her voice tinged with a chilling resignation. "We have no suspects," she stated. "No motive, no evidence. It's as if these individuals were taken by something unseen, something silent, something that leaves no footprint, no shadow. A ghost perhaps. A gray ghost, slipping through our defenses, taking our loved ones, and leaving nothing but questions in its wake. The name resonated. It captured the baffling, almost supernatural nature of the disappearances. It spoke to the utter helplessness people felt. A ghost. Gray because it was formless, indistinct, impossible to pin down. It wasn't a monster you could fight, or a criminal you could track. It was an absence, a void. The police hated the name. They saw it as sensationalist, undermining the serious nature of their investigation. But the public latched onto it. It gave a name, however ethereal, to the terror that was now stalking their city. The gray ghost became a chilling shorthand for the inexplicable, for the silent, impossible theft of human lives. As the months turned into a year, and then two, the cases remained cold. The initial flurry of media attention subsided, replaced by a grim acceptance. Jessica Robbins, David Chan, and Emily Sanchez were officially listed as missing persons, presumed dead, but with no explanation, no closure. Their families were left in an agonizing limbo, forever haunted by the unknown. But the gray ghost wasn't finished. The entity, whatever it was, seemed to operate in cycles, periods of eerie inactivity followed by another impossible vanishing. And each time the fear rekindled, a fresh wave of terror washing over the city. The pattern, though seemingly random in location and victim profile, held one constant: the absolute inexplicable nature of the disappearance. Every time a new name was added to the list, the same questions arose. How? Why? And most terrifying of all, who would be next? The city lived under a silent, invisible threat, a predator that left no trace, no struggle, just a gaping hole in the lives of those left behind. The gray ghost was a master of impossible vanishing acts, and its legend was only just beginning to take hold. The initial disappearances were met with a bewildered, almost stunned disbelief by local law enforcement. It wasn't just a missing person, it was an erasure. The first few cases, starting with a young college student named Sarah Jenkins, then a retired high school teacher, Michael O'Connell, and a stay-at-home mother, Jessica Thompson, were initially treated as unrelated incidents. Each time, the circumstances were eerily similar. A perfectly ordinary evening, a familiar environment, and then nothing. No forced entry, no signs of struggle, no ransom notes, no witnesses. Just an empty space where a person used to be. Detective David Miller, a man whose career was built on logic, evidence, and the grim realities of human depravity, found himself staring into an abyss of the unknown. He was a veteran of the force in the quiet, unassuming town of Havenwood, a place where the biggest crime usually involved a stolen bicycle or a noisy neighbor. Now Miller, with his perpetually furrowed brow and a mind like a steel trap, was facing something that defied every criminal profile, every investigative technique he had ever learned. The first reports were confusing, contradictory. Sarah Jenkins, a bright, ambitious 20-year-old, had been last seen studying in her apartment. Her roommate, Emily Davis, returned from a late shift to find the apartment door unlocked. Sarah's books open on her desk, a half-empty mug of tea still warm, and Sarah herself gone. No note, no struggle, no sign of anyone else having been there. It was as if she had simply walked out of existence. Then came Michael O'Connell, a beloved figure in the community, known for his meticulous routines. He had been working in his meticulously kept garden, a hobby he pursued with almost religious devotion. His wife Martha stepped inside to answer a phone call, a matter of minutes. When she returned, the garden hose was still running, a trowel lay beside a freshly dug patch, and Michael, who had been humming a familiar tune moments before, had vanished. The gate was latched from the inside. The hedges were too dense for anyone to have slipped through unseen. Martha swore she heard nothing, saw nothing, just the sudden, unnerving silence. Jessica Thompson's disappearance was the third in a string that stretched the limits of credulity. She had been putting her two young children to bed. Her husband, Mark, was in the living room watching television. He heard her tucking them in, the soft murmur of her voice, then the familiar click of the bedroom door. When he went to check on her an hour later, the children were asleep, the house was quiet, and Jessica was nowhere to be found. Her car was in the driveway, her purse on the kitchen counter, her phone charging by the bed. It was as if she had dissolved into the very air of her own home. Detective Miller and his team, initially convinced they were dealing with a series of unrelated, perhaps runaway cases, quickly realized the chilling pattern. 3 people from different walks of life with no apparent connection had vanished without a trace, leaving behind no forensic evidence, No forced entry, no witnesses, and no motive. The absence of evidence was not just perplexing, it was terrifying. It suggested a perpetrator so skilled, so meticulous, or so utterly alien in their methods that they defied conventional understanding. The police response intensified. Every available officer was pulled into the search. Helicopters scanned the dense forests surrounding Havenwood. Dive teams scoured the murky depths of the local lake. Bloodhounds were brought in, their acute senses baffled by the complete lack of a scent trail. They would sniff the last known location of the vanished individuals, circle once, twice, then simply sit, confused, as if the scent had reached an invisible wall and simply evaporated. It was as if these people hadn't just disappeared, they had been erased. Forensic teams pored over every inch of the crime scenes, their high-tech equipment looking for fibers, fingerprints, DNA, anything. They found nothing. No stray hair, no boot print, no smudged window pane. It was as if the air itself had swallowed the victims whole, leaving no ripple, no disturbance. The houses, the garden, the apartment, they all remained pristine, untouched, save for the echoing void where a life had once vibrated. Detective Miller spent sleepless nights poring over case files, interviewing distraught families again and again, hoping a new detail, a forgotten memory would surface. He chased every lead, no matter how remote. Disgruntled former employees, secret lovers, gambling debts, anything that could offer a conventional explanation. Each time he hit a dead end. Sarah Jenkins was a model student. Michael O'Connell was a pillar of the community. Jessica Thompson was a devoted wife and mother. Their lives were open books, their reputations unblemished. There was no hidden past, no secret life that could explain their sudden, absolute disappearance. The media, initially restrained, began to sense the mounting unease. Local news outlets ran headlines questioning the police's progress. Another vanishing. Havenwood gripped by fear. Invisible predator haunts quiet town. The lack of answers fueled speculation, fear, and a growing sense of helplessness. People started locking their doors earlier, checking on their neighbors more often, and casting nervous glances at the shadows outside their windows. It was a sharp-witted reporter for the Havenwood Chronicle, a young woman named Clara Jennings, who coined the term. In a front-page article detailing the mounting terror and the baffling lack of clues, she wrote, "Like a phantom, a whisper in the wind, this unknown entity slips in and out of our lives, leaving only silence. It is a presence that leaves no trace, a specter of fear. It is perhaps a gray ghost." The name stuck. It perfectly encapsulated the elusive, almost supernatural nature of the disappearances. It was a predator that moved unseen, unheard, a master of stealth, leaving behind only the chilling void of absence. The moniker quickly spread, whispered in hushed tones across coffee shops, grocery aisles, and schoolyards. The Gray Ghost, a name that brought with it a cold dread, a realization that something truly inexplicable was preying upon their community. The police, despite their best efforts, were powerless against a foe they couldn't see, couldn't hear, and couldn't even prove existed beyond the gaping holes in people's lives. The Gray Ghost was not just a criminal, it was becoming a legend, a terrifying embodiment of the unknown that lurked just beyond the veil of ordinary life. Detective Miller hated the name. He was a man of facts, of tangible evidence, of logical deductions. Gray Ghost sounded like something out of a horror novel, not a real-world criminal investigation. But he couldn't deny its chilling accuracy. How else could one describe a perpetrator who left absolutely no trace? No fingerprints, no DNA, no disturbed dust motes, not even a whisper of sound. It was as if the very laws of physics bent to accommodate its impossible exits. The pressure on Miller mounted with each passing day. The mayor called him daily, urging progress. The state police offered assistance, but even their advanced resources yielded nothing new. The FBI was consulted, their profilers baffled by the lack of any discernible pattern or motive. There was no common demographic among the victims, no shared hobby, no financial connection. They were just ordinary people, plucked from their ordinary lives, as if by an unseen hand. The only common thread was the absolute, inexplicable nature of their vanishing acts. Miller started to feel the weight of the town's fear pressing down on him. He saw it in the eyes of the shopkeepers, the parents picking up their children from school, the elderly couples who now refused to leave their homes after dark. Havenwood, once a symbol of small-town tranquility, was slowly but surely transforming into a crucible of dread. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret, every creaking floorboard a warning. The gray ghost had not just taken people, it had stolen the town's peace. He found himself re-examining every detail, every minute, every second surrounding the disappearances. He drew timelines, crisscross maps, created elaborate charts, hoping to spot an anomaly, a tiny deviation from the perfect blank slate of each case. But there was nothing. The perfection of the vanishing acts was their most terrifying aspect. It was a calculated, precise operation, executed with an efficiency that was both chilling and utterly baffling. The gray ghost was not just a local problem anymore. News of the impossible disappearances had leaked beyond state lines, capturing the attention of national media and true crime enthusiasts. Havenwood became a macabre destination, a place where people came to gawk at the houses where people had simply ceased to be. The local economy suffered, tourism plummeted, and a pervasive sense of paranoia began to settle over the once vibrant community. Detective Miller knew he was up against something unprecedented. He was fighting a ghost, an invisible enemy that seemed to mock the very foundations of law enforcement. He had always believed that every crime left a trace, that every perpetrator, no matter how clever, made a mistake. But the gray ghost left nothing. No trace, no mistake, just an empty space and a growing legend of fear. And as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the terrifying question began to echo in everyone's minds. Who would be next? And how do you catch something that leaves no proof it was ever there? The answer, for now, remained as elusive as the gray ghost itself. The answer, for now, remained as elusive as the gray ghost itself. Detective Michael Thorne felt the weight of that elusiveness in his bones, a constant dull ache that had burrowed deep into his chest. Weeks bled into months, and the investigation, once a flurry of activity, had settled into a grim, repetitive cycle of reviewing dead ends. The whiteboards in the Havenwood Police Department's main briefing room were a testament to their futility. Scrawled with victim names, dates, stolen items, and intricate web diagrams, they were now mostly covered in red NOS, failed S, and question marks that felt less like inquiries and more like shouts of desperation. Michael ran a hand over his perpetually tired eyes, the fluorescent lights of the precinct office doing little to alleviate the headache that had become his unwelcome companion. Across from him, his partner, Detective Jessica Riley, meticulously reread case files, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was usually the pragmatic one, the voice of reason, but even her usual optimism had worn thin, replaced by a quiet, simmering frustration. "Anything, Jess?" Michael asked, the question a reflex more than a genuine hope. Jessica sighed, pushing a stray strand of auburn hair from her face. "Same as before, Mike. Eleanor Vance, 62. Antique porcelain doll collection gone. Robert Sterling, 78. Rare first edition books vanished. Maria Rodriguez, 45. Family heirloom jewelry, poof. Every single one the same story. No forced entry. No fingerprints. No witnesses. No DNA. No security camera footage worth a damn. It's like they just blinked out of existence." Michael leaned back in his creaking chair, the sound a mournful echo in the late-night quiet. "We've been over this 100 times. We interviewed every neighbor, every delivery driver, every person who'd ever set foot in those houses. We dusted every surface, checked every lock, every window, every vent. We even brought in specialists to analyze the dust, the air particles, the damn silence left behind. Nothing. Absolutely nothing." The gray ghost wasn't just a thief. It was an insult, a mocking challenge to everything Michael Thorne believed about law enforcement. Every crime left a trace, a ripple in the fabric of reality. But the gray ghost left a vacuum. It didn't just steal objects. It stole the very proof of its existence. The pressure from outside was immense. Mayor Thompson called daily, his voice a tight coil of barely suppressed panic. The media, initially fascinated, had grown increasingly critical, running headlines that screamed about police incompetence and a town held hostage by an invisible menace. The citizens of Havenwood, once a close-knit community, were now gripped by a pervasive fear, a creeping paranoia that turned neighbor against neighbor, suspicion against shadow. People locked their doors 3 times, installed alarm systems that screamed at the slightest breeze, and still the fear lingered. How do you protect yourself from something that leaves no sign it was ever there, let alone that it's coming? "Maybe we're looking at it wrong," Jessica mused, tracing a finger over a schematic of Robert Sterling's house. What if the lack of evidence is the evidence? What if that's the signature? Michael snorted a humorless sound. A signature of absence? How do you build a profile on a ghost, Jess? We can't even confirm it's a he or a she. We don't have a motive. The stolen items are wildly disparate in value and type. They range from priceless art to a collection of antique buttons. The only common thread is that they're all cherished, irreplaceable items to the victims. But not necessarily valuable on the black market, at least not all of them, Jessica pointed out. The buttons, for instance, or Eleanor's porcelain dolls. They held sentimental value, but their monetary worth was modest compared to Maria Rodriguez's diamond necklace. Which means what? Michael pressed. It's not strictly about profit? Or the gray ghost fences everything through a network we can't even begin to trace because there's no physical connection to the thief. They had explored every theory, no matter how outlandish. A master illusionist? Someone with unparalleled lock-picking skills who also somehow managed to wipe every surface clean? A network of insiders, one for each victim. All perfectly coordinated and perfectly silent? A ghost, as the moniker suggested? Each theory crumbled under the brutal weight of zero tangible evidence. The department psychiatrist, Dr. Evelyn Reed, had even suggested they consider the possibility of mass hysteria, or that some victims might be fabricating the thefts for insurance claims or attention. But when confronted with the sheer number of cases, the consistency of the no-evidence pattern, and the genuine distress of the victims, even Dr. Reed had admitted it was beyond the scope of psychological explanation. These people weren't lying. Their treasures were gone. Michael pushed himself up and walked over to the main whiteboard, where a faded map of Havenwood was pinned. Red circles marked the locations of the thefts. They were scattered, seemingly random. No particular neighborhood, no clear geographic pattern. Affluent areas mixed with middle-class homes. Single-story, two-story apartments. It was a chaotic splatter like a shotgun blast. Have we missed anything, Jess? Michael asked, his voice raw with fatigue. Anything at all? A faint smell? A subtle sound reported by a neighbor that we dismissed? A shared past among the victims, however obscure. Jessica joined him, her gaze sweeping over the map. We traced every victim's background. Family trees, work history, social circles, even their favorite coffee shops. Nothing. No connections. No common enemies. No shared secrets. Except for one thing, Michael said, almost to himself. They all lived alone. Every single one of them. Jessica nodded slowly. That's the only consistent demographic factor. Single occupants. No partners, no kids living at home. It simplifies access, certainly, but it doesn't explain the how. It means the gray ghost targets vulnerability, Michael concluded. People who wouldn't have someone else in the house to witness, or to notice something amiss immediately. People whose routines might be easier to observe. They had spent weeks staking out potential targets, places that fit the single-occupant profile and had valuable possessions. They had set up surveillance, motion sensors, infrared cameras, but the gray ghost never struck when they were watching. It was as if it knew, or more chillingly, it didn't care. It was simply that good. The sheer audacity of it was maddening. To operate with such precision, such silence, such complete erasure of one's presence. It was almost artistic. We're chasing a ghost, Mike, Jessica said, her voice barely a whisper, echoing the name the media had given their phantom thief. And the more we chase, the further it seems to get. Michael stared at the map, at the red circles that represented stolen memories, shattered peace, and the growing terror of a town. He felt the phantom pressure of the gray ghost's gaze, unseen but ever present, watching them fumble in the dark. We need to think like it, Michael finally said, turning from the map, his eyes burning with a renewed, desperate resolve. Forget the rulebook. Forget what we know about criminals. We're dealing with something else entirely. Something unprecedented. How do you steal something without ever being there? How do you make yourself invisible? How do you leave behind nothing but a question mark? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. The gray ghost had not only stolen physical objects, it had stolen the very sense of security from Havenwood, and the faith of its police department. They were adrift, lost in a sea of nothingness, desperately searching for a current, a ripple, a single clue that would tell them where to go next. But the waters remained still, impossibly quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for the gray ghost to strike again. And with each passing day, Michael Thorne felt the chilling certainty that it would. He just didn't know where or when or how. And that was the most terrifying part of all. The city held its breath, but Michael Thorne barely noticed. He was lost in a labyrinth of his own making. A mental landscape constructed from crime scene photos, forensic reports, and the chilling silence that followed each of the gray ghost strikes. Days bled into nights, marked only by the dwindling coffee in his mug and the ever-present hum of the fluorescent lights in his office. Sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford, a weakness he refused to indulge. Every waking moment was dedicated to the phantom, to unraveling the threads of a mystery that felt less like a case and more like a personal affront. The pressure mounted not just from the public, but from within the department. Captain Davies, a man whose patience was as thin as his hairline, had given Michael a thinly veiled ultimatum. "Thorne," he'd said, his voice a low growl, "we need something. The mayor is on my back, the media's a frenzy. This gray ghost nonsense is turning us into a laughingstock, or worse, making us look incompetent. Find a lead, any lead, before this city tears itself apart." Michael understood. The media had seized upon the moniker with a macabre glee, painting the gray ghost as an almost supernatural entity, an invisible force capable of slipping through the city's defenses unnoticed. News channels ran endless segments, speculating on motives, profiling the victims, and interviewing terrified citizens. The city, once vibrant and bustling, now felt cloaked in a perpetual twilight of suspicion. People eyed their neighbors, locked their doors earlier, and whispered about the unseen predator that stalked their streets. The fear was palpable, a heavy blanket smothering the usual rhythm of urban life. But Michael had nothing. No witnesses who saw anything beyond a fleeting shadow. No fingerprints that didn't belong to the victims or first responders. No DNA evidence that yielded a match. It was as if the killer evaporated into thin air, leaving behind only the profound emptiness of what was lost. He'd interviewed Alice Henderson's colleagues, Robert Miller's clients, their families, their friends. He'd traced their financial records, their phone calls, their internet history. He'd even delved into their pasts, searching for old grudges, hidden enemies, secret lives. But every path led to a dead end. Every inquiry met with the same frustrating blankness. The victims on the surface were unconnected. A successful architect, a high-powered corporate lawyer. Different social circles, different industries, different personal lives. "It has to be something," Michael muttered to himself one night, surrounded by overflowing evidence boxes and corkboards plastered with photos and maps, connected by countless strands of red string that led nowhere. "There's always a pattern. Always." He wasn't alone in his self-imposed exile. Detective Emily Chan, a sharp, ambitious young officer fresh out of the academy, but with a mind like a steel trap, had volunteered to assist him. She was relentless, methodical, and possessed an uncanny ability to spot minute details others overlooked. While Michael wrestled with the big picture, Emily meticulously re-examined every single piece of paper, every digital file. "Detective Thorne," Emily said one morning, her voice cutting through the stale air of the office, "I've gone through Miller's case files again. You know, the corporate ones. He was involved in a lot of high-stakes mergers and acquisitions, particularly for the city's infrastructure projects. Remember the controversy surrounding the new Riverwalk development?" Michael nodded, rubbing his temples. "Vaguely. Political squabbles over land use, environmental concerns. Miller was the sharp end of the stick for the developers, I recall." "Exactly," Emily continued, pointing to a highlighted document on her tablet. "He successfully pushed through several key land deals. Even when there was significant public opposition, he essentially cleared the way for the project to proceed." "And Alice Henderson," Michael mused, staring at her photo on the corkboard. "She was the lead architect for the Riverwalk revitalization itself. Her firm designed the entire master plan." A flicker of an idea, faint but persistent, began to spark in Michael's mind. He walked over to the map of the city, focusing on the expansive, ambitious Riverwalk project. It was the crown jewel of the city's urban renewal efforts, a multi-billion-dollar endeavor meant to transform the downtown waterfront. "So Miller handled the legal groundwork, the acquisition of properties, paving the way," Michael said slowly, his voice gaining a newfound intensity. "And Henderson designed the actual blueprint, the physical manifestation of the project." Emily's eyes widened. They weren't connected personally, but professionally. They were both instrumental in the Riverwalk development. One cleared the path, the other drew the vision. Michael felt a jolt. It wasn't about who they were as people, or what their personal lives entailed. It was about what they represented to the city. They were both key players in reshaping its future, its landscape. The Grey Ghost wasn't targeting individuals for personal vendettas. They were targeting figures of urban progress, architects of the city's next chapter. The Grey Ghost isn't just killing people, Emily, Michael said, the realization hitting him with the force of a physical blow. They're making a statement about the city itself, about its growth, its direction. He started frantically pulling more red string, connecting photos of Henderson and Miller to the Riverwalk project on the map. The pattern, once invisible, was now glaringly obvious, terrifyingly clear. If his theory was correct, the next target wouldn't be random. It would be someone else intimately involved in shaping the city's future. Someone whose work was transforming the urban landscape. Who else is heavily involved in major city development, in shaping the future of this metropolis? Michael asked, his gaze sweeping over the map as if searching for a ghost in the street grid. Emily, catching his urgency, began typing furiously on her computer, cross-referencing names associated with the city's most prominent ongoing and upcoming projects. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The only sound was the rapid click of Emily's keyboard and Michael's increasingly ragged breathing. Then Emily stopped. "Michael," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Eleanor Vance. She's the CEO of the Metropolitan Renaissance Foundation. They're the primary financial backers for almost every major urban renewal initiative in the last 5 years, including the Riverwalk. She's essentially the financial architect of the city's future." Michael felt a cold dread seep into his bones. Eleanor Vance, a formidable woman, known for her philanthropic endeavors and her unwavering vision for the city. She fit the pattern perfectly. Not a creator, not a facilitator, but the enabler of the city's transformation. The Grey Ghost's next move, he realized, wasn't just predictable. It was imminent. "Where is she, Emily?" "Now," Michael demanded, grabbing his jacket. Emily pulled up Vance's schedule. "She's at a gallery opening tonight. The Art in Urban Spaces exhibition. It's at the Old Northwood Gallery, a renovated warehouse district near the waterfront. A public event, lots of people. A public event. The perfect cover for an unseen predator." The Grey Ghost thrived on anonymity, on vanishing into the crowd. "Call Captain Davies," Michael ordered, already halfway out the door. "Tell him we have a lead. Tell him to scramble every available unit to the Northwood Gallery. I'm going ahead." He sprinted down the hallway, the exhaustion of days without sleep momentarily forgotten, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. The Grey Ghost. He was finally seeing the killer's shadow, finally understanding the twisted logic. But understanding was one thing, stopping them was another entirely. The drive to the Northwood Gallery was a blur of flashing lights and blaring sirens. Michael pushed his patrol car to its limits, his mind racing, piecing together fragments, trying to anticipate the ghost's next move. He pictured Eleanor Vance, surrounded by art enthusiasts, oblivious to the deadly game being played around her. He imagined the Grey Ghost, a silent hunter, already there, blending in, watching, waiting for the opportune moment. When Michael finally skidded to a halt outside the grand, industrial facade of the Northwood Gallery, the scene was eerily normal. A stream of well-dressed patrons entered and exited, mingling on the wide sidewalk. No panic, no chaos, no sign of a struggle. He burst through the double doors, his hand instinctively on his weapon, his eyes scanning the throng of people, searching for Eleanor Vance, searching for the ghost. The gallery was a symphony of hushed conversations, clinking glasses and soft jazz. Art adorned the exposed brick walls, illuminated by strategic spotlights. Michael pushed through the crowd, his gaze sweeping over faces, a desperate urgency propelling him forward. Then he saw her, Eleanor Vance, standing by a large abstract sculpture, engaged in conversation with a small group. She looked calm, elegant, utterly unaware of the danger that stalked her. Michael started towards her, weaving through the clusters of people, his heart pounding in his chest. He was close. He was so close. But as he neared Eleanor Vance, his eyes caught on something else, something subtle, almost missed in the periphery of his vision. A small, intricately folded paper crane, fashioned from what looked like a page torn from a blueprint, lay innocently on the pedestal of the sculpture right next to Eleanor. It was a detail so slight, so out of place, that it screamed a silent, chilling message. He looked at the crane, then at Eleanor Vance, then back at the crane. And then he looked up, scanning the faces in the crowd, searching for a sign, any sign, of the person who might have placed it there. The faces blurred into a sea of polite smiles and casual indifference. No one met his gaze. No one seemed out of place. But the paper crane, it was identical to the one found at Robert Miller's apartment, and the one found at Alice Henderson's site. A signature. A calling card. The gray ghost had been here. They had left their mark. And they were gone. The silence in Kevin Thompson's immaculate living room was a hollow drumbeat against Detective Sarah Jenkins' ears. Her gaze swept over the scene, a familiar chill creeping up her spine. The victim, Kevin, a man in his late 40s, sat slumped in an armchair, a half-empty glass of iced tea on the table beside him. No signs of struggle, no forced entry. Just the same eerie stillness that had defined the previous two cases. But the paper crane, it was identical to the one found at Robert Miller's apartment, and the one found at Alice Henderson's site. A signature. A calling card. The gray ghost had been here. They had left their mark. And they were gone. Third one, Sarah. Detective Mark Rodriguez's voice was a low growl, laced with a frustration that mirrored her own. He stood by the doorway, his eyes scanning the apartment with a professional intensity that couldn't mask the growing dread. 3 victims. 3 perfect, silent deaths. And 3 of these damn origami birds. Sarah knelt beside the armchair, careful not to disturb anything. Kevin Thompson's face was peaceful, almost serene, a stark contrast to the violence that had undoubtedly ended his life. The medical examiner, Dr. Lena Hansen, was already at work, her movements precise and unhurried. "Any preliminary cause, Lena?" Sarah asked, her voice hushed. Dr. Hansen straightened, pushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "No obvious trauma, Sarah. No entry wounds, no signs of blunt force. Just like the others. My suspicion is a fast-acting poison, administered orally. But we won't know for sure until we get him back to the lab." She paused, her eyes meeting Sarah's. And again, no defensive wounds. No struggle. It's like they just accepted it. Or they never knew it was happening, Mark interjected, stepping further into the room. Robert Miller was found asleep. Alice Henderson was reading. Now Kevin Thompson just relaxing. This killer is a phantom, Mark. They move in and out without a trace, leaving behind only their twisted art. Sarah carefully observed the paper crane. It was a flawless piece of origami, intricate folds creating a delicate bird-like form. It rested on a small antique side table, as if placed there deliberately, a morbid centerpiece. Forensics bagged the crane. And I want a full sweep for prints, fibers, anything at all. Every surface, every inch of this apartment. Don't miss a single dust motes. Her voice, though quiet, carried the weight of her command. The crime scene unit, already swarming the apartment, moved with renewed urgency. They knew the drill by now. This wasn't just another homicide, it was the gray ghost. The city was already on edge, the media in a frenzy. Another victim would ignite a full-blown panic. "Let's get a background check on Kevin Thompson immediately," Sarah instructed. "Every detail. Employment, family, friends, financial records, medical history. Anything that connects him to Robert Miller or Alice Henderson. Any shared hobbies, organizations, old schools, anything." Mark pulled out his notepad, his pen scratching furiously. Already thinking the same thing. 3 seemingly unconnected individuals. A retired history professor, a freelance architect, and now what did Kevin Thompson do? A young officer, Officer Miller, checked his tablet. Kevin Thompson. He was an accountant. Worked for a mid-sized firm downtown. Divorced, no kids. Lived alone. Sarah frowned. An accountant. Robert Miller, a history professor. Alice Henderson, an architect. No obvious links. No shared profession, no clear social circles. This isn't making sense. Unless the connection isn't obvious, Mark mused, running a hand through his hair. Maybe it's something personal, something hidden in their pasts. Or maybe it's entirely random targets, and the gray ghost is just picking people who fit a certain profile of isolation or vulnerability. The thought sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. A killer who chose victims based on their solitude, their quiet lives, was far more terrifying than one with a clear motive. It meant anyone could be next. Back at the precinct, the investigation room buzzed with a grim energy. Whiteboards were filled with timelines, victim profiles, and speculative connections. Photos of Robert Miller, Alice Henderson, and Kevin Thompson were pinned side by side, their faces staring out like silent accusations. Each photo had a small digital image of the paper crane next to it. "Okay, let's review everything we have on the cranes," Sarah said, addressing the team. "Lab results from the first two. Any new findings from this one?" A forensic tech, David Chun, stepped forward. "Detective, the paper is identical in all three cases. A high-quality, specialized type of Japanese origami paper, very thin, with a subtle silver thread running through it. It's not a common brand you'd find in a hobby store. We've traced it to a single importer in San Francisco, who distributes it to a handful of specialty art supply stores across the country. One of those stores is right here in the city downtown." A flicker of hope ignited in Sarah. "A lead. Finally. Get a warrant for that store's customer records. I want to know everyone who's purchased that specific paper in the last 6 months, especially in quantities that suggest repeated use." "On it," Mark said, already delegating the task. "It's a long shot. They could have bought it anywhere, or had someone else buy it for them." "True, but it's more than we had yesterday," Sarah countered. "The MO is consistent. The method of entry, the lack of struggle, the suspected poison, the signature crane. This killer is highly organized, meticulous, and seemingly invisible. No witnesses, no forced entry, no struggle, no apparent motive. Except the signature," David Chun added. "The cranes themselves. They're not just folded paper. Each one is a perfect example of a specific origami style, often associated with peace and longevity. But in this context, it feels like a mockery. Or a message," Mark suggested. "Something we're not understanding." The victimology team presented their findings on Kevin Thompson. Like the others, Kevin Thompson lived a quiet life. No criminal record, no known enemies, stable job. His finances were in order. He had a few close friends, mostly from work, and saw his ex-wife occasionally for dinner. Nothing suspicious in his recent activity. No large withdrawals or unusual purchases. "What about his digital footprint?" Sarah asked. "Emails, social media, browsing history?" "Clean," Officer Miller reported. His social media was mostly family photos and mundane updates. No controversial posts, no online arguments. His email was mostly work-related or newsletters. Nothing to suggest he was involved in anything illicit or dangerous. The lack of anything concrete was infuriating. It was like trying to catch smoke. "Let's go back to the beginning," Sarah said, pacing the room. "Robert Miller, Alice Henderson, Kevin Thompson. Is there anything they shared, however small? Did they ever attend the same conference? Were they clients of the same bank? Did they ever visit the same restaurant, the same park, even on different days?" Hours turned into a blur of cross-referencing databases, interviewing friends and family, and chasing down dead ends. The frustration mounted. Each victim was a silo, unconnected to the others by any obvious thread. Then, a new piece of information came in from the forensics lab. "Detective Jenkins, we found something on the latest crane," David Chun announced, his voice holding a hint of excitement. Microscopic analysis revealed a trace amount of a very specific type of pollen. It's from a rare orchid, not native to this region. It's a hybrid, specifically cultivated for its unique color and scent. Sarah's head snapped up. "An orchid? Where would someone come into contact with a rare orchid?" "That's what we're trying to pinpoint," Chun replied. "It's not a common houseplant. You typically find it in a botanical garden, a high-end florist, or a very specialized private collection. We're narrowing down the exact species and its known locations. This was different. This wasn't just paper. It was an environmental clue, a physical link to a specific place or interest. Get me a list of all botanical gardens, high-end florists, and known private orchid collectors in the tri-state area," Sarah ordered, a spark of renewed determination in her eyes. "And cross-reference that with any known associations of our victims. Did any of them have an interest in orchids? Did they visit these places?" The team sprang into action, a new direction energized by this unexpected lead. The gray ghost might be a phantom, but even phantoms left traces. A microscopic speck of pollen from a rare orchid. It was tiny, almost invisible, but it was a thread. A thread that, if pulled correctly, might just unravel the entire terrifying mystery. The killer was meticulous, yes, but perhaps they had made one tiny beautiful mistake. A mistake that could finally lead them to the person who was silently terrorizing their city. The killer was meticulous, yes, but perhaps they had made one tiny beautiful mistake. A mistake that could finally lead them to the person who was silently terrorizing their city. Detective Miller felt that desperate, electric hope surge through the precinct like a jolt of pure adrenaline. He'd gathered his most trusted, most relentless investigators, their faces grim with exhaustion but alight with a rekindled fire. For weeks they had been chasing shadows, re-interviewing witnesses, sifting through mountains of digital breadcrumbs that led nowhere. Now, with this new directive to find the imperfection in the killer's perfect storm, a new energy took hold. Every single piece of evidence, Miller had declared, his voice raw, from every single scene, every fiber, every dust particle, every microscopic scrape, we're going to re-examine it all, not for what we expect to find, but for what shouldn't be there. For the anomaly. It was a monumental task, a painstaking journey back through the labyrinth of the Grey Ghost's crimes. They brought in external specialists, scientists whose expertise lay in the most obscure corners of forensic analysis. Among them was Dr. Evelyn Reed, a forensic materials scientist with a reputation for seeing what others missed. Dr. Reed was a quiet woman, her spectacles perched on her nose, her eyes sharp and constantly observing. She wasn't looking for the obvious. She was looking for the unlikely. For days, the sterile labs hummed with renewed activity. Microscopes were pushed to their limits, gas chromatographs whirred, and mass spectrometers sang their complex data songs. Detective Miller practically lived in the lab, fueled by stale coffee and a burning need for answers. He watched Dr. Reed, hunched over a powerful electron microscope, meticulously scanning samples from the very first Grey Ghost victim, a young woman named Sarah Thompson. Sarah's apartment had been a clean slate, meticulously wiped, yet something in Miller's gut told him a ghost still lingered there. Then late one night, a soft, almost imperceptible gasp broke the silence. Dr. Reed straightened, rubbing her tired eyes, then leaned back into the eyepiece, her posture stiffening. "Detective Miller," she called, her voice low but urgent. I think I've found something." Miller was at her side in an instant. He peered into the microscope, his eyes struggling to make sense of the abstract landscape. "What is it, doctor?" "A particulate," she explained, her finger hovering over a magnified image on a connected screen, almost invisible to the naked eye, even with standard forensic magnification. "It's crystalline with a very specific, almost alien structure. I found traces of it on Sarah Thompson's blouse near the collar, and then I cross-referenced. It's also present in minute quantities at every single Grey Ghost crime scene." Miller's heart hammered against his ribs. "Every scene? How could we have missed this?" "It's incredibly fine, detective, easily dismissed as environmental dust or adhering to other fibers. But its chemical signature, it's unique, synthetic, not naturally occurring." Dr. Reed's voice grew more excited. "And what's more, it consistently appears near the entry and exit points the killer used, and on the victims themselves, suggesting direct contact or proximity to the source." The discovery was a revelation, a tiny speck of truth that had lain hidden in plain sight for months. This wasn't a fingerprint or a stray hair or a shoe print. It was something far more subtle, far more insidious. Dr. Reed and her team worked tirelessly, analyzing the composition of the particulate. It was a complex silica-based compound, infused with rare earth elements, exhibiting properties consistent with high-performance insulation or specialized optical coatings. It was not something you'd find in an average home, or even an average industrial setting. This was specialized, proprietary material. The database search was tedious, spanning across industrial manufacturers, research facilities, and high-tech material suppliers. The list was initially long, but as they refined the chemical signature, it dwindled. Finally, a single name emerged, shining like a beacon in the darkness: Ether Dynamics. Ether Dynamics was a cutting-edge manufacturing plant nestled on the outskirts of the city, a sprawling complex of gleaming steel and tinted glass. They specialized in advanced optical components, high-performance composites, and next-generation insulation materials for aerospace and defense applications. It was a place obsessed with secrecy, with clean rooms and restricted zones, a fortress of innovation. And crucially, it was the primary producer and user of the unique silica-based compound Dr. Reed had identified. Miller felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The gray ghost had been a phantom, a whisper. Now they had a location. A place where the ghost might have a home or at least a workplace. The investigation shifted gears dramatically. Discreet surveillance was initiated around Ether Dynamics. Background checks were run on every employee with access to the specialized materials, every contractor, every security guard. They were looking for anyone with an unusual past, a history of violence, a connection to the victims, or simply someone who didn't quite fit. The sheer number of employees was daunting, but Miller's team was relentless. They cross-referenced employee addresses with crime scene locations, looking for patterns. They scrutinized work schedules, searching for individuals with unusual shifts, late-night access, or extended periods of unsupervised work. And then one name flagged: Arthur Jenkins. Arthur Jenkins was a systems engineer at Ether Dynamics. On paper, he was unremarkable. 42 years old, single, lived in a modest home about 20 minutes from the plant. No criminal record, no history of psychological issues. A consistent employee for 15 years. He was described by colleagues as quiet, meticulous, almost invisible. He kept to himself, rarely participated in company events, and spent his weekends on solitary hobbies like amateur astronomy and complex model building. But there were anomalies. Jenkins' specific role involved the calibration and maintenance of the very clean rooms where the specialized silica compounds were processed and tested. This meant he had unrestricted access to virtually every part of the facility, often working alone during off-peak hours or late shifts. His work schedule was flexible, allowing him to be present at the plant at odd hours, or conveniently absent when needed. Furthermore, his home address, while not directly on the Grey Ghost terror path, was equidistant to several key crime scenes. More chillingly, a deeper dive into Jenkins' personal history revealed a tragedy long buried. 25 years ago, his younger sister, Emily, had disappeared without a trace from a nearby town. Her case had gone cold, an unsolved mystery that had haunted the Jenkins family for decades. The local police had eventually closed the file, attributing it to a runaway or an unfortunate accident, but Arthur had never accepted it. He had spent years quietly, obsessively trying to find answers, poring over old police reports, even developing a rudimentary understanding of forensic analysis through online courses and forums. He had, in his own way, been conducting his own cold case investigation, driven by a silent, burning grief. The connection was tenuous, yet profoundly unsettling. Could the loss of his sister have twisted Arthur Jenkins, transforming him into the methodical, terrifying Grey Ghost? Was his meticulous nature, his obsession with detail, a direct result of his personal tragedy? Did he see himself as a twisted arbiter of justice, or was his past simply a catalyst for a deeper, darker psychosis? Miller stared at Arthur Jenkins' photograph, a bland, almost forgettable face. Yet, behind those unremarkable eyes, Miller sensed a hidden depth, a carefully constructed facade. The Grey Ghost, the elusive phantom, was no longer a ghost. He was a man with a name, a job, and a past. And he worked at Ether Dynamics, a place where the very dust on his clothes could finally betray him. The next step was the most dangerous, closing in on a killer who had proven himself to be utterly ruthless and almost impossibly clever. The sheer weight of that realization settled over David like a shroud. Arthur Hayes, the name once just a blip in the vast ocean of potential suspects, now resonated with a chilling finality. A man with a meticulously crafted veneer of normalcy, a life that seemed utterly unremarkable, yet beneath it thrummed the dark current of a monster. He had a past, and he worked at Ether Dynamics, a place where the very dust on his clothes could finally betray him. The next step was the most dangerous, closing in on a killer who had proven himself to be utterly ruthless and almost impossibly clever. The team moved with a silent, focused intensity. Emily, her eyes still wide with the shock of the breakthrough, pulled up every shred of information on Arthur Hayes. Michael, ever the pragmatist, began mapping out Ether Dynamics, its layout, its security, potential entry and exit points. David, meanwhile, felt a cold dread mixed with a surge of grim satisfaction. They had him. Or they had a him. Now they just had to prove it and then somehow catch him. Arthur Hayes lived in a quiet, unassuming suburban house, indistinguishable from a dozen others on his street. A well-maintained lawn, a two-car garage, even a small garden patch. He was a creature of habit, left for work precisely at 7:45 a.m., returned at 6:10 p.m., walked his golden retriever, Buddy, around the block twice a day. He frequented the same small grocery store, the same coffee shop. On paper, he was the epitome of a law-abiding citizen. But the monster often wore the most ordinary masks. The dust wasn't dust at all, not in the traditional sense. It was a synthetic microfiber, almost invisible to the naked eye, barely detectable even under powerful magnification. Dr. Anya Sharma, the lead forensic scientist, had explained it with a mix of awe and trepidation. It's a polymer composite detective, extremely rare, used in advanced materials science. Ether Dynamics is one of the very few facilities in the country, possibly the world, that deals with this specific compound. They're developing next-generation aerospace alloys, among other highly classified projects. The fibers had been found, not just on the victims but crucially at the abandoned warehouse, woven into the fabric of the tarpaulins used to conceal the bodies, embedded in the grime of the floorboards. It was a signature, accidental yet undeniable, linking Hayes directly to the brutal tableaus he had created. The fibers were so unique, so specific to Ether Dynamics' proprietary research, that it was like a fingerprint left in plain sight. Surveillance began immediately. David assigned his most discreet operatives. They watched Hayes for 3 days, charting his every move, every interaction. He was a ghost in plain sight. No late-night excursions, no clandestine meetings, no sudden changes in routine. He seemed to live a life utterly devoid of anything suspicious, a perfect, bland existence. It was almost frustrating, this unwavering normalcy, a testament to his control. "He's too clean, David," Emily observed, poring over surveillance footage. "It's like he knows we're watching, even before we started. Or he's just that good," David countered, rubbing his temples. "A man who can make bodies vanish without a trace for months, who can orchestrate such elaborate displays, isn't going to suddenly start acting like a cartoon villain." The team debated their next move. A direct arrest seemed too risky. Hayes was clearly intelligent, meticulous, and dangerous. They needed more than just the fibers, even if scientifically damning. They needed to catch him in the act, or at least force him to reveal his hand. "What if we create a situation?" Michael suggested. "Something that would rattle him. Something that would force him to break his routine, to make a mistake." The idea was audacious, risky, but it was the only path forward against a killer so cunning. They decided to leak a fabricated news story, a breakthrough in the Grey Ghost case, hinting at a new, specific piece of forensic evidence, linking the killer to a certain type of advanced material, without explicitly naming Ether Dynamics or the fibers. The hope was to spook Hayes, to make him believe they were closer than he thought, prompting him to either flee or worse, make a desperate move. The fake story hit the local news feeds with calculated subtlety. A small blurb, easily missed by the casual reader, but potent enough to catch the eye of someone intimately involved. Investigators closing in on Grey Ghost, new forensic evidence points to specialized industrial link. David watched the surveillance feed of Arthur Hayes' house that evening with a knot in his stomach. Would it work? Or would it just send him deeper into hiding? Hayes arrived home at 6:12 p.m., 2 minutes later than usual. A barely perceptible deviation. He walked Buddy just like always. He got his groceries just like always. David felt a wave of disappointment. Maybe the man was truly unshakable. Then, at 9:47 p.m., something changed. Hayes' living room light, usually extinguished by 9:30 p.m., remained on. For almost an hour he sat by the window, a book in his hand, but his gaze seemed fixed on something beyond the glass, something unseen. The camera zoomed in, but his expression was unreadable, a blank mask. At 10:35 p.m., he finally turned off the light. But he didn't go to bed. The thermal camera showed a faint heat signature moving through the house, then down into the basement. He stayed there for a long time, over 2 hours. "What's he doing down there?" Emily whispered, her voice tight with anticipation. "Could be anything," Michael replied, "but it's a break in routine." "He's rattled." David felt a prickle of unease. A rattled killer was a dangerous killer. A rattled clever killer was a nightmare. They couldn't move in on the house without a warrant, and even then they needed to be absolutely certain. The basement activity, while suspicious, wasn't enough. The next morning, Hayes left for work at his usual time. But David noticed something subtle. Hayes was wearing a different pair of shoes than he usually did for his commute, a pair that looked slightly worn, almost scuffed, instead of his usual polished loafers. It was a tiny detail, but in the world of meticulous killers, tiny details spoke volumes. "Check the usual dump sites, the abandoned properties," David ordered, his voice low. "Everywhere the gray ghost might have used. Look for anything disturbed, anything new. And tell the forensic team to be ready for anything." Hours crawled by. The surveillance continued, Hayes a placid lake on the surface, but beneath, David knew a storm was brewing. Then the call came. It was from one of the patrol officers sweeping an old, derelict industrial park on the outskirts of the city, a place that had been previously searched and cleared. "Detective, we found something." The officer's voice was strained. "A small shed off the main road. Looks like someone tried to clean it out recently, but they missed a spot. There's a symbol drawn on the wall, in what looks like dried blood." David hung up, his heart pounding. The gray ghost symbol. He knew it. A stylized, almost ethereal outline of a human figure, blurred at the edges, as if fading into mist. It was the calling card left at the few locations where bodies had been found, a macabre signature that had baffled them for months. Hayes hadn't fled. He hadn't gone into hiding. He had reacted to their leak, not by running but by cleaning. And in his haste, he had left behind a fresh, chilling clue. The shed was a secondary staging area, a place he might have used to prepare or store things related to his victims. The scuffed shoes. He had been there, perhaps late last night, trying to erase his tracks, disturbed by the news. David gathered his team. He's making a move. He's trying to cover his tracks. But he's not running away. He's doubling down. He's showing us he's still in control. The shed yielded more than just the symbol. Underneath a loose floorboard, a small insulated compartment was discovered. Inside, carefully wrapped in plastic, were several items. A pair of industrial-grade gloves, a few rolls of heavy-duty tape, and a small leather-bound journal. The journal. This was it. The key to the mind of the gray ghost. David felt a tremor of dread and excitement. This was what they had been searching for, the personal insight, the motive, the why. But as Emily carefully opened the journal, her face went ashen. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a manifesto. It was a meticulously kept log spanning years. Entries detailing dates, times, and observations of various people. Not victims. Not targets. Just names. People from ether dynamics. And next to each name, a series of cryptic codes and symbols. And a single chilling phrase repeated on multiple pages, almost like a mantra. The flawed must be refined. The weak must be purified. This wasn't just about catching a killer. This was about understanding a terrifying ideology. Arthur Hayes wasn't just a murderer. He was a self-appointed judge, orchestrating a twisted form of justice. And the people in his journal? They were his next potential targets. The game had just escalated into a race against time, with the lives of innocent people hanging in the balance. The gray ghost wasn't just a phantom of the past. He was a looming threat, and he was still somehow a step ahead. The sterile glow of the fluorescent lights in the precinct interrogation room felt mocking now, a stark contrast to the darkness that shrouded their understanding of the gray ghost. Michael slammed the old case file shut, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. Jessica, hunched over a collection of faded newspaper clippings, rubbed her temples. The realization had hit them like a physical blow. The gray ghost wasn't a ghost of the past, but a very real, very present threat, and he was actively continuing a decades-old agenda. "He's not just a copycat, Jess," Michael stated, his voice a low rumble of frustration. "He knows. He knows the original victims, the original methods, the original why." Jessica nodded, pushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "And he's escalating. The recent attacks aren't random. There's a pattern, Michael, a brutal, calculated pattern that we've been missing because we were looking at the victims in isolation." Their eyes met, a shared understanding of the immense pressure now weighing on them. The gray ghost was a master manipulator of time and perception, turning a historical cold case into a chillingly current nightmare. They had to think like him, delve into the forgotten corners of the past, and unearth the deeper connections that linked every single victim, old and new. They spent the next 72 hours in a blur of caffeine, cold pizza, and relentless investigation. Every document, every witness statement, every piece of forensic evidence from the original Grey Ghost murders was laid bare again. This time, they weren't just looking for clues to the killer's identity. They were searching for the invisible threads that bound the victims together, threads that might point to the Grey Ghost's ultimate objective. Michael meticulously cross-referenced the original victim profiles: Arthur Jenkins, the prominent city councilman; Eleanor Vance, the successful real estate mogul; and Robert Sterling, the esteemed architect. On the surface, they were pillars of the community, seemingly unrelated apart from their high status. But as Michael delved deeper into financial records and obscure corporate filings from the late 1970s, a faint, unsettling pattern began to emerge. "Jessica, look at this," Michael called out, pointing to a ledger entry in Vance's archived business accounts. A series of significant, untraceable payments made to a shell corporation called Horizon Holdings in the early 80s. Jenkins was on the City Planning Commission at the time, approving major development projects. Sterling's firm designed many of them. Jessica's eyes widened as she pieced it together. Horizon Holdings. I remember that name. It was briefly investigated for land acquisition irregularities in the Old Mill District, before it was redeveloped into the luxury condos we see today. The investigation was quietly dropped due to lack of evidence. Exactly, Michael affirmed, his finger tracing lines on a faded map of the city. The Old Mill District, a historically low-income area, quickly bought up, residents displaced, and then boom, luxury development. The original victims weren't just prominent. They were key players in a massive, ethically dubious land grab. They benefited immensely, while countless families lost their homes and livelihoods. A cold dread settled over them. The Grey Ghost wasn't just a killer. He was an avenger, a ghost of injustice, haunting those connected to a past sin. The Grey in his name wasn't just about elusiveness. It was about the moral ambiguity of actions that were technically legal but deeply corrupt. They then turned their attention to the recent victims: David Chan, the CEO of a modern real estate conglomerate, and Emily Carter, a high-powered corporate lawyer specializing in property development. It clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Chen's company was currently pushing for a similar redevelopment project in another historically underserved neighborhood, using aggressive tactics that mirrored those of Horizon Holdings. Emily Carter was his lead counsel. "He's targeting the architects of systemic injustice," Jessica whispered, the pieces of the puzzle finally locking together. The original Grey Ghost targeted those who profited from the Old Mill District scheme. Now someone, whether the original or a successor, is targeting those perpetuating similar schemes today, or their direct beneficiaries. The game had indeed escalated, but now they had a terrifying roadmap. The Grey Ghost wasn't striking randomly. He was following a deeply personal, morally charged hit list. Their next step was clear: identify who else was involved in the original Horizon Holdings scandal, and who among them or their direct heirs was still alive and prosperous today. Simultaneously, they had to look at contemporary figures involved in similar controversial urban development projects. The list was long, but one name stood out with chilling prominence: Richard Maxwell. Maxwell was a celebrated philanthropist now, but in the early 80s, he had been a junior partner at Eleanor Vance's firm, specifically tasked with managing the Old Mill District acquisitions for Horizon Holdings. He had made a fortune, then pivoted to charity work, seemingly laundering his past sins with good deeds. He was 82 now, frail but still a public figure, often seen at galas and community events. "Maxwell," Michael breathed, his eyes fixed on an old photograph of a younger, smirking Maxwell alongside Vance and Jenkins. He was directly involved. He profited just as much as the others. Why wasn't he targeted before? Maybe because he was less visible, less of a figurehead than Vance or Jenkins at the time, Jessica theorized. Or maybe the original Grey Ghost died before he could complete his mission. And now, someone else is picking up the torch. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. The Grey Ghost was a legacy, a living legend passed down. It meant this wasn't just about catching a killer. It was about confronting an ideology, a deeply rooted sense of vigilante justice. "We need to get to Maxwell," Michael declared, grabbing his jacket. Now. They scrambled out of the precinct, sirens wailing in their minds even before they reached their unmarked car. The drive to Maxwell's sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city was a blur of flashing lights and desperate urgency. Every second felt like an hour, every shadow a potential hiding place for their elusive nemesis. As they pulled up to the ornate gates of Maxwell's mansion, a chilling sight greeted them. The heavy iron gates, usually manned by security, stood ajar, swaying slightly in the evening breeze. A single pristine white lily lay on the ground just inside the entrance, its petals gleaming faintly in the twilight, the gray ghost's chilling signature. "He's here," Jessica whispered, her hand instinctively going to her sidearm. They burst into the mansion, calling out Maxwell's name. The grand foyer was eerily silent, the air thick with an oppressive stillness. Furniture was overturned in the living room. A priceless vase shattered on the marble floor. It was clear there had been a struggle, but no sign of Maxwell. As they moved deeper into the house, a low guttural moan echoed from the study. They rushed in, guns drawn. Richard Maxwell lay on the floor amidst scattered papers, his face ashen, a faint trickle of blood from a cut on his temple. He was alive but barely conscious, his eyes wide with terror. And on the large mahogany desk, meticulously placed, was a single aged photograph. It depicted a group of smiling men and women, younger versions of Jenkins, Vance, Sterling, and a very recognizable Richard Maxwell, all standing proudly in front of a sign that read, Horizon Holdings Old Mill District Redevelopment Project. Beneath the photo, scrawled in elegant, almost calligraphic handwriting, was a single word, justice. The gray ghost hadn't just attacked Maxwell. He had delivered a message directly to them. He knew they were close, knew they were uncovering his motive. He was taunting them, revealing the depth of his purpose, making it clear that this wasn't just about murder, but about a public reckoning, a brutal unveiling of long-buried truths. The game wasn't just a race against time. It was a psychological battle, and the gray ghost was inviting them to play on his terms. The game wasn't just a race against time. It was a psychological battle, and the gray ghost was inviting them to play on his terms. The gray ghost, always one step ahead, seemed to anticipate their every move. The cryptic messages continued, but their tone shifted, becoming less about individual vengeance and more about a systemic accusation. The city, already on edge, found itself gripped by a new wave of fear and suspicion. It wasn't just the victims anymore. It was the very fabric of their society that felt under attack. Suddenly, a series of anonymous digital billboards, appearing overnight in prominent locations across the city, began flashing a single chilling message. The foundation is rotten. October 26th, midnight. No other details, no specific threat, just those words. October 26th was exactly 1 week away. Detective Miller felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. This wasn't a personal vendetta. It was a declaration of war against the city's established order. Dr. Chun, poring over the billboard images, noticed a subtle, almost imperceptible watermark on the digital files. A small stylized G embedded in the lower right corner, visible only with precise magnification. It was the gray ghost's signature, a defiant taunt in plain sight. "He's not just killing people, David," Dr. Chun said, her voice strained. "He's orchestrating a public spectacle. He wants everyone to watch, to question everything." Captain Evans, his face etched with exhaustion, called an emergency press conference, trying to reassure the public while simultaneously appealing for any information. But the public trust was eroding. Whispers of corruption within the city council, allegations of shady land deals, and rumors of a decades-old cover-up began to circulate like wildfire on social media. The gray ghost, without saying a word directly, was expertly fanning the flames of public distrust. Miller and Chun intensified their dive into the victims' pasts, not just their recent activities, but their entire careers, their connections, their hidden histories. They unearthed a common thread, a subtle but undeniable link that connected Emily Hayes, the city auditor, Michael Thompson, the prominent real estate developer, Jessica Davies, the respected judge, and even David Peterson, the former mayor. It wasn't just that they were powerful. It was that they were all tangentially, yet crucially, involved in a single massive municipal project from nearly 30 years ago, the construction of the Liberty Tower. The Liberty Tower was a gleaming skyscraper that dominated the city's skyline, a symbol of progress and prosperity. But as Miller delved deeper, he found archived reports of cost overruns, accusations of shoddy construction, and a series of mysterious industrial accidents during its initial building phase. 3 construction workers had died on site, officially ruled as tragic but unavoidable accidents. The investigations had been swift, the findings conclusive, and the project had moved forward. Until now. The foundation is rotten, Dr. Chun murmured, connecting it to the billboard message. He's talking about the Liberty Tower, the literal foundation, and metaphorically, the foundation of the city's power structure. They pulled every available file on the Liberty Tower project. The original engineering reports, the contractor bids, the city council approvals from back then. It was a mountain of paperwork, much of it digitized, but some still in dusty physical archives. As they sifted through it, a pattern emerged. The original plans had called for specific, high-grade materials and rigorous safety protocols. But subsequent amendments, often pushed through by a then junior city councilman named Robert Maxwell, now a powerful state senator, had approved cheaper alternatives and relaxed oversight. Robert Maxwell. The name hit Miller like a physical blow. Maxwell was a respected figure, a pillar of the community, known for his integrity. Could he be involved? Or was he merely a pawn in a larger game? The Grey Ghost public challenge for October 26th at midnight seemed to hinge on this single pivotal event. What was he planning? Another murder? A public revelation that would expose the rot at the heart of the city? Dr. Chun discovered something even more disturbing. Among the archived files for the Liberty Tower, a series of internal memos from a structural engineer named Sarah Jenkins surfaced. Jenkins had vehemently protested the material changes, citing severe structural integrity risks, particularly regarding the building's sub-basement levels, which housed critical utility infrastructure. Her memos were increasingly urgent, culminating in a resignation letter where she explicitly stated she could not, in good conscience, sign off on the project under the revised conditions. Her career had subsequently vanished. She disappeared from the public record entirely. Sarah Jenkins, Miller repeated, a name he'd never heard before, yet it felt like a key. She predicted a disaster, and she was silenced. The Grey Ghost wasn't just targeting the corrupt. He was targeting those who had benefited from the silencing of truth, those who had built their empires on the graves of integrity and honest work. Emily Hayes had audited the project's finances, rubber-stamping the cost adjustments. Michael Thompson's company had supplied the cheaper materials. Jessica Davies had presided over the quick closure of the accident investigations. David Peterson, as mayor, had championed the tower as a symbol of his administration's success, ignoring all dissenting voices. The Grey Ghost was meticulously peeling back the layers of a decades-old conspiracy, forcing the city to confront its original sin. The public sentiment was a volatile mix of fear, anger, and a morbid fascination. News channels ran 24/7 coverage, dissecting every detail, interviewing experts on structural engineering and urban planning, all pointing back to the Liberty Tower. The city was unraveling, its secrets exposed for all to see. Miller and Chun raced against the clock, trying to decipher the Grey Ghost's next move. If the foundation was rotten, what would happen at midnight on October 26th? Was he planning to physically damage the Liberty Tower, creating a real catastrophe to parallel the metaphorical one? Or was the threat purely symbolic, a final devastating reveal of the truth that would shatter reputations and bring down institutions? They considered an evacuation of the Liberty Tower, but without a specific threat, it would cause mass panic and play directly into the Grey Ghost's hands. He wanted chaos. He wanted the city to tear itself apart, to question every authority figure, every monument to their supposed progress. Captain Evans, visibly shaken, received an anonymous tip, delivered to his home address in a plain envelope. Inside was a single, grainy photograph of Sarah Jenkins, taken years ago, looking much younger, standing beside a man Miller didn't recognize. On the back, scrawled in elegant script, were two words: her son. Her son. The Grey Ghost. The pieces began to click into place with terrifying clarity. The Grey Ghost wasn't just an avenger of abstract justice. He was the son of a woman whose career, whose reputation, perhaps even her life, had been destroyed by the very people he was now targeting. This wasn't just about a public reckoning. It was deeply, profoundly personal. He was fighting for his mother, for the truth she had tried to bring to light. The photograph was a game-changer. It humanized the Grey Ghost, giving him a motive beyond abstract morality. It made him a son seeking justice for his wronged mother. The man in the picture was young, perhaps in his early 20s at the time. He had a distinct birthmark above his left eyebrow, a small dark patch. Miller instantly recognized it from a cold case file, a missing person report filed almost 2 decades ago. A young man named Alex Jenkins, Sarah Jenkins' only child, who had disappeared shortly after his mother's career imploded. The case had been closed, presumed a runaway, but now, Alex Jenkins. The name resonated with a chilling finality. He had been there, a child witnessing his mother's professional destruction, possibly even her despair. He had lived with the injustice, festering, growing, until it transformed him into the gray ghost. His disappearance wasn't a runaway, it was a retreat, a preparation. He had been planning this for decades, meticulously researching, waiting for the perfect moment to unleash his retribution. The gray ghost wasn't some random vigilante. He was a ghost from the city's past, resurrected to haunt its present. His targets were not just victims of his rage, but players in a drama that had begun long before they were aware. And the final act was set for October 26th at midnight, at the very symbol of their deceit, the Liberty Tower. The implications were staggering. The gray ghost wasn't just a killer. He was a historian, a prosecutor, and an executioner, all rolled into one. He had spent his life meticulously documenting the crimes, gathering the evidence, and now he was presenting it to the world in the most brutal, undeniable way possible. The city was about to face its judgment, and the gray ghost was the judge, jury, and executioner. The clock was ticking, and Miller knew that the gray ghost's ultimate plan extended far beyond just exposing the truth. He intended to destroy the very idea of it, to make sure no one could ever ignore such injustice again. The psychological war had become a battle for the soul of the city itself. The psychological war had become a battle for the soul of the city itself. David Miller felt a cold dread settle deep in his bones, a feeling far more unsettling than any physical threat. Jessica Rossi, her face grim, echoed his unspoken fears. The gray ghost wasn't just exposing corruption. He was weaponizing doubt, aiming to shatter the very foundations of public trust. His final act, they realized, wouldn't be a single explosive revelation, but a sustained, insidious assault on the concept of objective truth. Their frantic search intensified, every lead a dead end, every digital trace a mirage. The ghost was a master of misdirection, leaving breadcrumbs that led nowhere, encrypted messages that dissolved into static. But then a pattern emerged from the digital noise. A series of seemingly random short-burst transmissions, too fragmented to be data, too rhythmic to be accidental. It was a heartbeat, a pulse in the digital ether, emanating from an abandoned server farm on the city's forgotten industrial fringe. "He's not just broadcasting," Rossi murmured, her fingers flying across a keyboard, overlaying the transmissions on a city map. "He's orchestrating. He's setting the stage for a distributed attack." Miller's mind raced. A distributed attack. Not one truth, but 1,000 conflicting narratives, simultaneously unleashed. "He wants to drown us in information," Miller said, his voice barely a whisper, "to make it impossible to discern reality from fabrication, to prove that truth itself is subjective, malleable, and ultimately meaningless." The realization was terrifying. This wasn't about justice anymore, it was about anarchy. The gray ghost wasn't seeking to purify the system. He was seeking to dismantle the very framework by which society understood itself. He wanted to make everyone a suspect, every institution a lie, every fact a potential manipulation. They mobilized immediately. The server farm, a sprawling derelict complex of rusted metal and shattered windows, loomed under the pre-dawn sky. A skeleton crew of local police and a tactical FBI unit surrounded the perimeter. Miller and Rossi, armed with their wits and a growing sense of urgency, led the entry team. Inside, the silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of their boots on debris and the distant hum of unseen machinery. The air was thick with dust and the metallic scent of decay. They moved through cavernous halls, past rows of defunct servers, their indicator lights long dead, their power cables severed. It felt like walking through the fossilized remains of a digital age. Then they found it. Tucked away in a subbasement, behind a reinforced door that had once secured classified data, was a single operational server rack. It hummed with a low, vibrant energy, its multiple indicator lights blinking furiously. Before it, a makeshift workstation. A high-end laptop, a bank of monitors displaying rapidly scrolling code, and a custom-built interface of flashing lights and tactile switches. But there was no one there. The chair was empty, still warm. A half-empty mug of cold coffee sat beside a discarded energy bar wrapper. The gray ghost had been here mere moments ago. They were too late. On the main monitor, a countdown timer flashed, rapidly approaching 0. Below it, a chilling message scrolled. When truth becomes a weapon, trust becomes the first casualty. And when trust dies, what remains? Rossi immediately began trying to shut it down, her fingers flying across the keyboard, attempting to override the system. But the ghost had anticipated this. The system was locked down, self-sustaining, a digital fortress designed to complete its mission autonomously. He's initiated a multi-layered, decentralized broadcast, Rossi announced, her voice strained. It's hitting every major news network, every social media platform, every public display board across the city. Not just video, not just audio, but deepfake simulations, manipulated documents, AI-generated eyewitness accounts. It's designed to overwhelm, to contradict itself, to make every piece of information suspect. Miller watched the countdown tick down, the seconds dissolving into the past. He could almost hear the digital tsunami building, ready to break over the city. This wasn't just a leak. It was a digital plague, designed to infect the very fabric of perception. As the timer hit 0, the monitors flickered, then displayed a single iconic image. The stylized gray mask of the ghost, superimposed over a distorted skyline of the city. A synthesized voice, calm and devoid of emotion, began to speak, simultaneously broadcasting across every screen, every speaker, every connected device in the metropolis. It was the ghost's final manifesto. For too long, the voice began. You have been fed a narrative, a carefully constructed illusion of order, of justice, of truth. But what happens when the architects of that illusion are themselves corrupt? What happens when the guardians of truth become its most skilled manipulators? The city awoke to chaos. News anchors mid-sentence were cut off by the ghost's broadcast. Billboards shifted from advertisements to the gray mask. Smartphones buzzed with an unprecedented flood of conflicting reports. One feed showed Mayor Richard Thompson accepting a briefcase of cash from a shadowy figure. Another, equally convincing, depicted Police Chief Sarah Jenkins orchestrating a cover-up of a catastrophic infrastructure failure. A third, complete with forged documents, implicated a beloved philanthropist in a vast money laundering scheme. Each story was meticulously crafted, each detail seemingly verifiable, yet each contradicted another equally plausible revelation. Miller watched, horrified, as Rossi struggled to contain the digital deluge. It's too widespread, she muttered, defeated. It's designed to be uncontainable. Every time we shut down one node, 3 more pop up. It's replicating, evolving. It's a hydra, designed to sow distrust in all information. The gray ghost's voice continued, a chillingly calm counterpoint to the city's unfolding panic. You wanted the truth. I have given you all the truths. The truth of the powerful, the truth of the disenfranchised, the truth of the manipulated, and the truth of the manipulators. Now discern it for yourselves, if you can. Then a final personal message flashed across the monitors, directed at Miller and Rossi, appearing only on their local screens within the server farm. It was a single cryptic sentence. The shadow reveals what the light refuses to see. But sometimes the shadow consumes the light entirely. And then silence. The server rack's lights continued to blink, but the broadcast ceased. The monitors went blank, returning to their default screens, as if nothing had ever happened. The ghost had vanished, leaving behind not just a message, but an entire city plunged into an information abyss. In the days and weeks that followed, the city reeled. The gray ghost's final act was not a singular exposé, but a complete destabilization of public perception. Every official statement was met with skepticism, every news report with suspicion. Social media became a battleground of conflicting facts and manufactured outrage. The lines between truth and fiction blurred beyond recognition. People no longer knew who or what to believe. The ghost had succeeded in destroying not just a truth, but the very idea of it. Mayor Thompson and Chief Jenkins fought desperately to regain control, issuing statements, launching investigations, but the damage was done. The seeds of doubt had been sown too deeply, cultivated by the ghost's masterful psychological warfare. The city was fractured, its citizens retreating into echo chambers of their own preferred narratives, unable to agree on even the most basic facts. Detective Miller, haunted by the ghost's final words, found himself staring at the city skyline from his office window. The vibrant metropolis he once knew now felt shrouded in an invisible fog of uncertainty. He and Rossi had followed every lead, analyzed every byte of data, but the ghost remained a phantom. His identity was still unknown, his face unseen, his true name unheard. Jessica Rossi, sitting across from him, closed a file with a sigh. "We traced the last outgoing signals," she said quietly. "They bounced through an untraceable network of compromised satellites and dark web servers. He's gone, vanished without a trace." "But his message isn't," Miller replied, his gaze fixed on the distant buildings. "He didn't just expose secrets, Jessica. He exposed the fragility of our trust, the vulnerability of our perception. He showed us that in an age of infinite information, the most dangerous weapon isn't a bomb, but doubt." The unsolved case of the Gray Ghost became a permanent fixture in the city's lore. A cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones. Was he a hero, a villain, or something in between? A digital ghost who held up a distorted mirror to society, revealing its flaws and then shattering the mirror entirely, leaving everyone to pick up the fragmented pieces. His identity remained a mystery, his motives debated endlessly. Some believed he was a disillusioned insider, others a rogue AI, still others a collective of anonymous hackers. But what was undeniable was his impact. He had forced the city, and perhaps the world, to confront a terrifying new reality, that when the idea of truth itself is destroyed, the very soul of a city can be lost in the gray. The Gray Ghost had not just disappeared. He had become an enduring symbol of an age where the greatest mystery was no longer who committed the crime, but what could ever be considered true. And in the unsettling silence he left behind, that question echoed endlessly, a chilling testament to the Phantom's ultimate triumph.